Good morning, wonderful Unity family, and all those who may be listening to this message this morning. Today we are going to talk about pronouncing it good. We know that Genesis chapter 1 verse 31 says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good." That's part of it. It goes on to say in the evening and the morning, but we are more interested in this part of it. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And in Genesis chapter 2 verse 17, we are warned, "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat, for in that day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." So God saw all that he had made, he pronounced it good. And we also were admonished not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because there were consequences to eating of that tree. So how do we avoid this tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And how are we to pronounce everything good as after our Heavenly Father, Mother God? I would suggest a starting point would be to give our attention to that which is good. And even the seemingly not so good, to pronounce it all good. Because we know it is said that wherever our attention goes, energy flows. So by giving attention to anything, any subject, we energize that subject. And if we want to reap a rich harvest of only good, I would suggest we have to give our attention to the good, at least predominantly. And even where there are situations that appear not to be good, we are to use our creative word and pronounce it good. And we will see in most situations, after the time passes, we will observe that even those things that we thought were not for our highest good, we could look back on it and say, it is a good thing that happened to me. It turned out to be the best thing after all. So we energize whatever we give our attention to. And as Shakespeare himself said, there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. So we have to be careful where we give our attention and what we pronounce things as when they come into our environment, come into our life, whatever it is. And we know what we give our attention to, we truly tend to replicate in our lives. And that is why we have lots of children who generally, you have a lot of people, whatever occupations and vocations they have. You would have seamstresses, their children would tend to be seamstresses, doctors, lawyers, in many situations, performers, people in the performing arts, singers, their children, because they grow up in that environment and it becomes second nature what they are always in and around that particular environment. So their attention to whatever their parents are doing, and so it becomes second nature. And that is the easy part, when the things are positive, and so yes, we give attention. But what about those times when we encounter situations that appear not to be so favorable, so positive? How do we still pronounce it good? And there are a number of stories told on these matters. And one particular story that I've heard in a few versions, I'm going to talk about it. There was a king who had a very trusted servant who went with him wherever he went, wherever he traveled. And so one day they were riding in the forest and so on, and the king got injured. But his trusted servant did not suffer any injury. So of course, you know, the king, it's a king. He was irate, he was irate, he was quite annoyed with the servant because he got injured and the servant did not. So, but the servant, you know, was calm and he was telling him, no, it's good, it's all good, it's all good, words to that effect. And of course the king, that would annoy him even more, get him more angry, and so he wanted to know how this could be good, how he could say it's good. So he decided to put his trusted servant in prison, in a dungeon. And the trusted servant said, again, he said it's all good, and he went into the dungeon and so on. And so the king, one day, he went riding again, and of course his trusted servant is now in prison. So the king went on his own. So the king went and he rode and he rode and he rode, and he went to the end of his kingdom. And as he went past his kingdom, he was captured. He was captured by some persons who made human sacrifices. But in order to be sacrificed, you had to be perfect. They didn't deal with any person with injuries and so on. But they did not notice that the king had an injury. So they were preparing for the sacrifice, you know, getting the fire or whatever they used. And were very, you know, very advanced in their preparation to sacrifice the king. But then someone noticed he had an injury. So of course he could not be, he was not a good candidate, not a good subject for the sacrifice. So they let him go. And then he went back and he told he went back and, you know, he had second thoughts, and he went to his trusted servant and he was talking to him and explaining what had happened. And again, the trusted servant said, but it's good, it's all good. So of course the king wanted to know, well, how could it be good? There was I was captured, I was about to be sacrificed and so on. And what is good about it? So the trusted servant said, words to this effect of course, well, it was good for you that you were injured, because as you were injured, you were not able, they would not accept you as a sacrifice. And so that is how you got away. The injury, in fact, caused you to get away from, of course, a greater injury. That would have been the end of him, of course, if you were sacrificed. And then, so he said, but how could it be good that you were in the dungeon for all that time? And the trusted servant said, well, since I did not have an injury, and since I traveled with you everywhere, I would have been with you, and I would have been the one who was sacrificed. So we see that is a very dramatic example of how everything, there is good in everything. And the trusted servant, he accepted, he pronounced everything good. From the very start, the injury with the king, his going into imprisonment in the dungeon, he saw it all good. And closer home now in this environment, I am aware of some a family that was quarantined, and so they couldn't go to work, no one could go to work. But there was someone in that family, after the quarantine was over and that individual was able to go to work. When they went back out to work, the couple of days after, they were informed that someone in their department tested positive for the COVID-19. And at that point, the person, the individual who had gone back out was not in contact, because that person was in quarantine, was not in contact with the person who became positive. But everybody else in that department then had to be quarantined because they would have been in contact. So you see, there is, depending on how we look at things, there is good in everything. But in order to bring forth the good, we have to give our attention to the good and know that even though a situation appears to be unjust, unfair, and whatever, we have to come to that place like the trusted servant, where we can stand with the understanding and have the trust to know that if God, our Father, Mother, made everything and pronounced it all good, whatever comes into our life, there must be some good in it. Not that it is God, of course, who has sent it, perhaps by whatever, for whatever reason, whether it is our inattention to good, whatever the reason, it would have come. But out of it, some good can come of the experience when we trust in our Heavenly Father, Mother God, and we hold to the truth that and pronounce it absolute good. And one of the ways we do that is to pay attention primarily to the good, the beautiful, the truth. We are told this. We are told in the Bible, whatsoever things are beautiful, whatsoever things are true, if there be any beauty, and so on and so forth, we think on those things. But we live in a world, and it is quite often difficult to keep our focus, our attention on this absolute good that is happening. There are the headlines that grab our attention, CNN and all the media, and we think we sometimes we give more attention to them than we give to the truth that we know and the principles that we are not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we are not to be pronouncing constantly this good, that good, and the other one bad, and that one bad, and situations. We are to look for the good. When it's obviously good, we give thanks. When it is not so good, we stay the course and we look for the good and pronounce it good, and the good will surely come. And Emmett Fox, he talks about the mental equivalent. If we want anything in our lives, we have to first have the mental equivalent of that thing. So if you want success, you have to give your attention to success. Whatever it is you want to manifest in your life, you give attention to that rather than not that. But it is so, it's sometimes so easy to think we are giving our attention to the things we want and the so-called good. But really, there is some little latent fear, some little nagging doubt that it is, what we want will come to pass and so on. And unwittingly, we tend to focus on the good. But for those of you who know the work of Abraham Hicks, Esther and Jerry Hicks and the Abraham, that line of books and their philosophy, they call the not so good contrast. So it's simply a contrast between what we want and what we do not want. It's not that, there is the so-called good and evil, but we are to focus more on what we want and not give so much attention. Sometimes you get all worked up, all riled up about the evil and the this and the injustice. And by so doing, we really energize those states of consciousness rather than the states of consciousness of harmony and all good and well-being that we really want to. And it's unwitting, all we need to do, like a camera, is shift our focus from the things that seem to annoy us and irritate and so on, to the things that are all harmonious, and to know that it is all good. No matter what comes, what seems to be, it is all good. And we have to take responsibility for where we put our attention. We are currently experiencing some rise in cases of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago. And some people, they will go looking for reasons why it is, why that. But I think we spent a lot of time when we were in a much better place looking at countries and areas, many of them we have family in, and monitoring how many infections, how many deaths, how many this, how many that. Thinking, not really realizing that unwittingly we were giving our attention to that, or may have been giving our attention to that. And so the fact that it may be replicating in our environment now simply is, maybe we gave too much attention to that, and maybe now it's a good time to give our attention to ways of where they containing this, how are they containing this. Let's see that and behold the good. And in the situation with the COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago, we regret there have been some deaths, but generally persons have been not being really seriously affected by the so-called, be it infection, bacteria. They don't seem to know. Some say infection, some say bacteria, whatever. But so in that as well, we see there is good. There is good in everything. There is good, and we have the power through our word, through our contemplation, through our attention to pronounce it good and to bring the good that God has already created into manifestation in our world. And I am sure that many of us have taken this approach, and we are going to continue, and it will reap great benefits, not only for ourselves and our families and world communities, but everyone by extension. So this is where I would end today. I thank you for the attention, and let us agree, let us affirm, as Reverend Rollins reminded us, we have to deny, and we know we have to fill the space of after we deny. Let's give our attention, our focus to the good that God created, and when the seemingly not so good appears, let us pronounce it by our word to be good, and wait for the good in the situation to unfold. Give it our full attention. See the good, hear the good, believe in the good. Blessings to all.